Please. I want you tonight, Nolan. It's been almost a year since you even...
I want a divorce. You're not who I want to be with. You've never been, if I'm being honest. You're predictable, Avery. You're quiet. You don't fit the life I'm building.
He had already replaced her before he even told her. That was the part that would stay with her longest. Not the words, not the push. The fact that he had already moved on while she was still in the same house, sleeping in the same bed, making coffee every morning like nothing was breaking. Nolan Ashford liked being seen. Not known, not understood. Seen. There was a difference, and he had never once paused long enough to figure out what it was. Tonight was the Crestfield Foundation Gala, the kind of event where the right photo could carry a man's reputation for a full calendar year. Nolan had spent 40 minutes on his appearance. Jacket pressed, cufflinks centered, hair exactly where he wanted it. He stood in front of the bathroom mirror with the focused attention of a man who believed the most important thing in any room was the impression he made when he walked into it. He was going with Jade Mercer. Jade was a model. International campaigns, magazine covers, the kind of woman who made other men pause mid-sentence. Nolan had been seeing her for 4 months. He had not mentioned this to his wife. He had not mentioned much of anything to his wife. The bedroom door opened behind him. He didn't turn around. He already knew who it was from the sound of her footsteps. Soft, hesitant. The walk of a woman who had learned over 3 years of marriage that moving quietly was safer than being heard. Avery. She crossed the room slowly. When she touched his shoulder, her fingers barely landed, like she was asking permission just to make contact. "Please," she said. Her voice was low, almost a whisper. "I want you tonight, Nolan. It's been almost a year since you even..." He turned. He looked at her the way you look at something that used to matter. Then he pushed her. Not violently, not in a way that would leave a mark. Just firmly, his hands on her shoulders, moving her back, setting her out of his path like an obstacle. She stumbled against the edge of the bed and caught herself. "I want a divorce," he said. The room went completely still. "I've been pretending for a long time." He turned back to the mirror, straightening his lapel. "You're not who I want to be with. You've never been, if I'm being honest. You're predictable, Avery. You're quiet. You don't fit the life I'm building." She didn't speak. He watched her reflection. She was gripping the edge of the mattress with both hands. "I'm with Jade Mercer." He said the name the way someone drops something heavy deliberately from height. "She's who I should be with. You and I were a mistake from the beginning. 3 years, and I don't think I was ever really here." He picked up his watch from the dresser. "When I leave tonight, start packing." He walked out. The door closed with a soft, clean click. Avery did not move for a long time. The room held the shape of everything he had just said. The words didn't evaporate. They settled one by one, into the walls, into the carpet, into her chest where they sat like stones. Predictable, quiet, a mistake, never really here. She had known something was wrong. Of course she had. You can feel a person leaving even when they're standing in the same room. The way he stopped asking about her day. The way dinners went silent. The way his phone would buzz and he would angle the screen away and she would pretend not to notice because pretending was easier than what came after. But knowing something is wrong and having it said out loud to your face, those are 2 completely different wounds. She sat on the edge of the bed. She didn't cry. Not yet. She just sat there in the quiet, letting the pain arrive without fighting it. She had learned early in life that the fastest way through something was straight through the center of it. Avery Cole had not always been this invisible. Before this marriage, before she had sanded down her edges to fit neatly into Nolan's world, she had been building something real. The Cole Foundation, a nonprofit she had started at 24, quietly and without any announcement, funding literacy programs in underfunded schools across 3 states. She had organized fundraisers, secured grants, sat across from city council members and convinced them to care. She had done all of it while standing beside Nolan at his networking dinners, smiling on cue, handing him credit he didn't ask for and didn't deserve. Nobody at his parties knew. She had kept herself small so he could feel bigger. That was the thing about Avery Cole. She had given Nolan Ashford everything she had. her time, her energy, the version of herself she had worked hardest to become. And he had handed it back to her tonight in a flat voice while checking his own reflection. She stood up. She walked to the mirror. The woman staring back looked tired, tear-edged, worn somewhere behind the eyes in a way that had nothing to do with tonight and everything to do with the 3 years leading up to it. Avery looked at herself for a long moment. Then she raised her hand. She pressed her fingertips to the glass. "You are not what he said." Her voice was barely audible. The words felt awkward, foreign in her own mouth, like she was speaking them for the first time, which in some ways she was. "You are not boring. You are not invisible." She swallowed. "You are not a mistake." She said it again, then again, not because she fully believed it yet, but because she understood that belief had to start somewhere, even if it started shaking. She picked up her phone. Her hands were not entirely steady as she scrolled through her contacts. She passed name after name until she stopped on one. Derek Okafor, Nolan's business partner, the one who, at every event Avery had ever attended, had asked how she was and actually waited for the answer, who had remembered small things, that she preferred sparkling water, that she'd mentioned a book once and he'd read it and brought it up 3 months later. She had always noticed, and she had always filed it away under things that do not belong to me. She pressed call. It rang once. Avery. His voice came through immediately, warm, wide awake. No questions first. "What's wrong?" She exhaled. Something in her chest loosened at the sound of a voice that wasn't performing. "It's Nolan," she said. "He wants a divorce. He's with someone else. He said I was boring. He pushed me, Derek. He told me to pack my things before he even left the room." Silence. Not the silence of someone processing. The silence of someone making a decision. "Avery." His voice dropped an octave. Steadied. "You don't deserve a single word of that. Not one." She pressed her free hand over her eyes. "I thought maybe you could talk to him. Maybe get through to him somehow. I don't know what I'm supposed to do right now." "I'll try," he said. "But Avery, listen to me. Don't stay in that house alone tonight." A pause. "The Crestfield Gala is tonight. Come. Not for Nolan, not for anyone else. For yourself. You deserve one good evening. And the people in that room deserve to finally see who you actually are." She almost said no. The idea felt absurd. Getting dressed, going out, walking into the same room as her husband and the woman he had chosen instead of her. But something else was awake in her now. Something that had been sleeping for 3 years. "Okay," she said quietly. "I'll meet you at the entrance," Derek said. "I'll be there. You won't walk in alone." She lowered the phone. The house was silent. For the first time in years, the silence didn't feel like abandonment. Felt like clearance. Like the first breath after a long time underwater. She went to her wardrobe. Her fingers moved through fabric slowly, passing over safe colors and practical cuts, until she reached the back. Wrapped in protective cloth, unmoved for months, was the dress. She had bought it on a rare afternoon of optimism. Midnight blue, custom fitted. The silk moved like something that hadn't been told yet what shape it needed to take. The beadwork across the bodice caught light like scattered glass. She had bought it thinking that someday Nolan would look at her across a room and actually see her. He never did. But tonight was still her evening if she decided it was. She unwrapped it slowly, held it up. The fabric moved through her hands like cool water. She slipped into it and stood at the mirror, and what she saw stopped her breathing for a moment. The fit was exact. Not because the dress had been altered recently, because she had finally stopped altering herself. She did her makeup with steady hands. Foundation, contour, a deep sweep of color at her eyes that she rarely let herself wear. Her hair fell in loose, dark waves the way it naturally did when she stopped trying to control it. She added the diamond necklace she had bought herself after the Cole Foundation's first successful fundraiser. A quiet, private celebration. Earrings. A thin gold bracelet. She stepped back. The woman in the mirror looked like the person she had been before she learned to apologize for taking up space. She called her driver. "Bring the car around," she said. Calm. Clear. No explanation needed. Of course, Mrs. Ashford. She picked up her clutch. She looked around the bedroom one last time. 3 years of quiet in this room. 3 years of swallowed words and careful footsteps and a bed that had gotten colder by degrees she pretended not to measure. She walked out without looking back. The Crestfield Gala filled the Grand Meridian Ballroom from floor to ceiling with the kind of light that made everything look intentional. Chandeliers, candlelight, silk and tailoring moving through the crowd like well-dressed water. The music was low enough to talk over and beautiful enough that no one felt the need to. Derek was exactly where he said he'd be. He was standing at the main entrance with his hands in his pockets, watching the door with the patience of a man who intended to wait as long as it took. When he saw her, he went completely still. His eyes moved over her, not in the way Nolan's had earlier, which was the absence of seeing. This was different. This was someone registering what they were looking at. "Avery," he said quietly. He shook his head slowly. "I don't," he paused. Started again. "You look like someone just gave the room a reason to exist." She laughed. A real one. Not polished, not prepared. Just air escaping from somewhere genuine. They walked in together. The shift was immediate. Not loud. Not theatrical. But real. Conversations paused at the edges. Eyes followed the woman in midnight blue without being able to articulate why. Something about the way she moved had changed. She wasn't performing ease. She had arrived at it. She was not Nolan Ashford's wife tonight. She was Avery Cole. And the difference was written in every step. Across the ballroom, Nolan stood beside Jade Mercer with a glass of champagne and a conversation he was no longer tracking. Because he had seen her. The glass stopped. His face moved through several expressions in the span of 3 seconds. Recognition, confusion, something that looked close to disorientation. The woman standing across the ballroom with her shoulders back and her eyes clear and her diamonds catching light from 3 separate chandeliers was not the woman he had pushed off the edge of the bed tonight. Except she was. She had always been this. He just had never once looked long enough to find it. Beside him, Jade Mercer followed his gaze. She was quiet for a moment, studying Avery from across the room. Whatever image she had constructed from Nolan's descriptions, quiet, predictable, ordinary, was not what she was seeing. The woman across the room was magnetic, grounded, the kind of person whose presence you feel before you fully process their appearance. Jade turned back to Nolan. Something in her expression had shifted, quiet and internal, like a calculation being run. What kind of man throws something like that away? Avery and Derek moved through the crowd naturally, the way people move when they are not trying to perform anything. When they reached Nolan's circle, Avery met her husband's eyes without hesitation. No anger, no trembling, no performance of dignity, just the real thing. "Nolan," she said. Her voice was even, almost gentle. "I called my attorney this afternoon. The papers will reach you within the week." He opened his mouth. Nothing came. Derek turned to Avery then, and his voice, when it came, was quiet but entirely unhurried. "I've kept this to myself for a long time," he said. "I told myself it was the right thing, that your marriage was your marriage and I had no business saying anything." He paused. "But I'm not staying quiet anymore." The small circle around them had gone still. "I have watched you pour yourself into a life that never poured anything back. I watched you make yourself smaller so he could feel larger, and I said nothing because I was respecting boundaries that he was already crossing." His jaw tightened. "I don't want to watch from a distance anymore. I want to stand next to you, every day. Not as your husband's business partner. As someone who sees you clearly and chooses you knowing exactly what that means." He held her gaze. "If you'll let me." The air between them was charged and absolute. Nolan felt it the way you feel a door closing in a room you didn't realize you wanted to stay in. Jade stood beside him, and for the first time all evening, she was invisible. Not because she was any less present, but because the gravity in the room had moved. Avery looked at Derek for a long, still moment. Then she smiled. Not a polished gala smile. A real one. The kind that starts in the eyes. "You've been kind to me when kindness wasn't common," she said. "You remembered things I mentioned once, and asked about things I didn't say out loud. She tilted her head slightly. I'd like to find out who you are when we're not in the same room as him. She took his hand. They walked away from the circle together. Through the crowd, past the chandelier light, past the orchestra, toward the terrace doors. Nolan watched them go. He couldn't move. He stood exactly where he was, his champagne glass tilted at an angle he wasn't aware of, watching Avery laugh at something Derek said. A real laugh, her head tipping back slightly, her hand still in his. He had never once made her laugh like that. He had never once tried. Behind him, he heard Jade. He felt something press into his palm. Folded paper. And when he turned, she was already gathering her things. No scene. No announcement. She simply picked up her clutch and walked away through the crowd without looking back. He opened the note. I don't know what she did to make you treat her that way, but after tonight, I know it wasn't enough to deserve it. I won't be with a man who loves like this. He stood there. The ballroom continued around him. Glasses clinking, music rising and falling, people laughing at things that were genuinely funny. The world was completely indifferent to what was happening inside his chest. He walked to the terrace doors. Outside, under an open sky, he could see them. Avery and Derek on the far end of the stone terrace, talking quietly in the way people talk when they've stopped being careful around each other. When Derek turned toward her and she looked up at him, it didn't look like a beginning. It looked like a recognition. Nolan watched Derek kiss her gently under the full moon, and his hand came up slowly to cover his mouth. He had spent 3 years not seeing what was right in front of him, and now it was in front of someone else. The divorce was signed 11 days later. No contested clauses, no back and forth, just 2 sets of signatures and a stillness that came after. Derek proposed 4 months later. Not at a restaurant, not with an audience. At Avery's kitchen table, on a Tuesday evening, over takeout that had gone slightly cold because they'd been talking for 2 hours and neither of them noticed. He slid the ring across the table and asked her with no rehearsed speech. Just his voice, unguarded, and a question he already knew the answer to. She said yes before he finished asking. They built something real. Something that didn't require her to be quiet. The Cole Foundation expanded, new programs, new funding, a national partnership she had been cultivating for a year. When the announcement ran in a national outlet, a photo of Avery accompanied the piece. The profile called her a quiet force who had been operating in the background of American philanthropy for years. Nolan read it on his phone, alone, in an apartment he had moved into after the divorce. He had looked for Jade. She had moved on with the clean efficiency of someone who had never intended to stay. He sat with the article for a long time. There was a photo of Avery, laughing, full of purpose, her name printed in text below it in a way that belonged entirely to her. He hadn't known about the foundation. 3 years in the same house and he hadn't known. He had talked about himself the entire time. A year after the wedding, Avery and Derek had a daughter. They named her Reese. She had Avery's eyes and Derek's way of watching a room, carefully, fully, with the kind of attention that made people feel like they had been truly seen. Nolan heard about it from a mutual contact. He didn't respond. There was nothing to say. No version of the truth that rearranged itself into something better. He had walked out of a room where he was loved. He had told the woman doing the loving that she wasn't worth staying for. And she had believed him long enough to break, then stopped believing him just in time to build something extraordinary. Avery Cole had never needed rescuing. She had needed one evening, one mirror, one honest look, one decision to stop making herself small for a man who couldn't see her anyway. She made it, and she never once looked back at the door she had walked out of. Some people spend their whole lives waiting to be seen by the wrong person. When the right one was standing right there, patient, watching, ready, Avery stopped waiting. That was the whole story.